artist. This is painting number 1 of this artist.
Jesus.
All right, and so this one is the artist. Any guesses yet on what artist painted this famous painting?
Actually, that's multiple choice.
No, this is Jeopardy, so no multiple choice.
Yeah,
This
just
is,
throw out
you do
throw
not
out some
need to post
guesses.
it as a what is, but just any guesses.
Because I know this.
All right, let me give you a second painting. I'm going to show you 5 paintings. They're all by the same artist. Okay.
Okay.
So that was number 1, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about these paintings once we get going. This is the same artist.
Is it Vermeer?
Vermeer is an excellent guess, but unfortunately it is not Vermeer. So let me show you a third one. Third one might be one you recognize.
Oh.
It is Leonardo da Vinci. Very good. The first 2 were by Leonardo. This is Vitruvian Man. That's by Leonardo. If you don't know Vitruvian Man, you probably have seen The Last Supper. That's sort of the middle of The Last Supper. And then certainly, if you didn't know The Last Supper or Vitruvian Man, you definitely know the Mona Lisa, right? Probably the world's most famous painting, and they're all done by our mystery artist, who we all know by now, which is Leonardo da Vinci. So I wanted to talk just for a few minutes today on Leonardo da Vinci, the famous Italian artist, and then how it connects to AcDec. We'll kind of save that for the end. But let's look at the 5 paintings I just kind of put together. And again, most of you got it by the 4th or 5th painting, but they were all done by Leonardo da Vinci, who lived in the 15th century. 1452 is when he was born until 1519. So, 15th and 16th centuries. And the 5 paintings we just saw, the one that was the first one, I'll go back and show them each individually as well. First one's called Salvator Mundi. And the years that you see there are the years he was working on the paintings. The reason there's an asterisk next to this particular painting is there is a little question on whether he actually was the artist. I mean, this is 500 plus years ago, and the others we certainly know he did. There is a little question, but most people, generally recognize him as the artist. So we'll go back and look at that one again. But number 1 was Salvator Mundi. The second one was called Lady with an Ermine, which was the little animal that was in her arms. We'll look at that one again. That was maybe done over a 2-year period. The third one, which some of you recognize, was Vitruvian Man. That's not technically a painting, it's more of a drawing. He kept sketchbooks, which I want to show a little bit of that. And that was done in 1490, and we'll talk about what the significance is of that drawing. And then the last 2 that are certainly the most famous of the ones, Last Supper, which was taken about 3 years to finish, and that's in a chapel in Italy, and then the Mona Lisa, which is displayed in the Louvre in Paris. And that took almost more than a dozen years, actually, for him to finish. He took quite a long time, and when you're doing the world's most recognizable painting, I guess that's to be, sort of a given. So who was Leonardo da Vinci? How does he best reflect the time period that I know there are a lot of questions on in AcDec, which is the Renaissance period? He definitely is someone who we could call a Renaissance man, because he was so much more than just an artist. I mean, he was a scientist, he was an inventor, he was an architect, he was a scholar, and definitely a man of many cloths. All right, so Leonardo da Vinci was born Leonardo di Sira Piero da Vinci. He's born out of wedlock. His parents, he doesn't know for sure who his father is. His mother, was just a regular peasant in the Florence region of Italy. He's actually born in the city of Vinci, and the name Leonardo da Vinci refers to where he was born. It's not his surname. His father's name was Piero, and so Leonardo de Ser Piero means Leonardo, the son of Piero. And again, Da Vinci is just like saying where you're from. So Leonardo of the town of Vinci. So if you're, seeing him referenced, it really wouldn't be accurate to call him Da Vinci. That just means he's from the town of Vinci. It's Leonardo. And I'll show you where Vinci is exactly, but it's not far from the much larger city of Florence, and he spent a lot of his youth there in Florence. So he's educated in Florence. He works under a pretty famous sculptor at the time by the name of Verrocchio. And Verrocchio had studied under another famous artist, Donatello, and these are ones who, again, we see questions in our competitions sometimes. Probably the other incredibly famous artist that is from this region, just a little bit later, he's about a generation younger than Leonardo, is Michelangelo. Michelangelo also studied briefly under Verrocchio, so they're all kind of connected. Now Leonardo only did about 24 attributed major works that we definitely know he was a part of. Still recognized as one of the most famous and greatest painters in history. And the first one I want to show you closer again, is Salvator Mundi. That sold about 7-8 years ago in an auction for over $450 million once you count the fees given to the auction house, which is a record for the highest amount ever paid in auction for one individual painting. Now, if the Mona Lisa ever sold, it would sell for way more than that, but I don't think the Louvre is giving it up anytime soon. And we could definitely agree, probably the Mona Lisa is the world's most famous painting. Last Supper is probably the most reproduced religious painting of all time. Here in the United States, there's only one Leonardo da Vinci painting, which you can see. It's in Washington, D.C. It's the Ginevra da Vinci. A few years ago here in Houston, they had a traveling display at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts that brought in one Leonardo image. If you want to go see his paintings in museums, go to Italy. There are 3 in Rome alone that have some Da Vinci art, and again, I should probably say Leonardo as opposed to Da Vinci. The Louvre has 5 Leonardo paintings. And as I mentioned, the National Gallery of Art of Washington has 1. So this is a timeline just showing, when he lived and some of the other things that are happening at the same time. I won't go through all of this. There's a great biography of Leonardo da Vinci, which is by the historian Walter Isaacson, and most of what we know about Leonardo is because he kept these prolific notebooks. He kept 50 to 60 in his lifetime. He literally was writing his thoughts. He would go out and study birds and how they're flapping their wings, and writing about it and using that to see if he could invent a flying machine. So there are about 20,000 to 28,000 pages of notes and sketches that are preserved. There was a biography of him written right after he died in the 16th century by a person by the name of Giorgio Vasari. It was called Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. So even after his death, he's already being treated as one of the world's greatest artists ever. He was working with other great artists. The one at the very bottom is a Botticelli image. That's the Birth of Venus. And again, if you're really looking to study more on him, I would suggest that 2017 biography of Leonardo. He never married and he never had children, and that's going to be covered in that book as well. So I said he was born in Vinci, Italy. This is an overhead of that city, which is in the mountains. Famous church, which is sort of the center of that town. You can see where the town is, and it's a little bit to the west of Florence, so it's about 30 miles or so. 50, 60 kilometers. This is one of the first earliest paintings he ever really worked on. He didn't do the whole painting. Most people think that this little angel at the far left of the screen is Leonardo, as well as the background. The landscape that you see in the background. But this is called the Baptism of Christ, and it was finished around 1475 in that studio where he was studying as a young, artist apprentice. Verrocchio did a lot of the work, but his pupil, of course, is going to become much more famous. And if you actually look at this image, again, they think this little angel is done by Leonardo, and compare, say, the way this angel looks compared to the angel right next to him, or to Jesus, or to John the Baptist. John baptizing Christ. Artist scholars will tell you that this image is showing so much more emotion and life than, say, that we see and some of the. There are some people who think that actually Leonardo may have worked a little bit on Jesus as well, but again, artists, historians, and scholars will study this, and they definitely focus on this angel because it has curls, which is sort of one of the trademarks of a lot of Leonardo image paintings. Again, this is Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. Leonardo would have been about 20 years old when this painting was finished. Let's look at the 5 I told you, and then if you ever want to see this, it's in Florence at the gallery there. Let's look at the 5 I mentioned at the very beginning here. Salvator Mundi, which I said sold for over $450 million. Again, some question on whether he did a lot of it or was it touched up by later artists rather. The name Salvator Mundi means savior of the world, and this is actually a very common pose that you see in a lot of Renaissance paintings at the time. What you see is, again, Jesus making a sign of the cross with the right hand, and in his left hand you can kind of see he's holding an orb, like a globe, which is kind of see-through, and that represents Earth. And again, other artists have done similar poses. It's a very common pose of that time period. But if you, and I won't do comparisons, but if you compare the life-looking image and how accurate and emotions that you see here compared to some of the others, most people will be drawn to this one. This particular painting, this has a really interesting story. It was owned by wealthy patrons for several centuries, and they thought that it was lost in the mid 1700s. But apparently it was found again in 2005, so 20 years ago. And at that point, it was given to famous museums. It was displayed briefly in London, as I mentioned. That brought it over to $450 million. It was sold to the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, and it's not in a museum right now. The thought is that Saudi Arabia is going to be opening a new world-class museum, and it will probably be the centerpiece there. It will be the painting that people will come to see, like the Mona Lisa. But probably the most interesting thing about it, to me, is this last note that, again, this painting was lost for 200 years. There was a Louisiana family, and I do not know the name of the family, that somehow had it. And they didn't know who drew it, so they sold it in an auction there for under $1,200. And then that's in 2007, that's not that long ago. Then you go 10 more years later and it sold for $450 million, or $400 million to the person who owned it at that time, which was that London museum. So that Louisiana family, who did not know who it is, I feel very sorry for them because they lost out on quite a bit of money. But that's the Salvator Mundi. Again, it will probably be in Saudi Arabia in the future. There's also a museum, if you want to see more on Leonardo, there's a museum in Brooklyn in New York, a Salvator Mundi Museum, just devoted to this painting. even though they don't have the original painting. Here's one of their pieces you can watch. It's called, or look at, Salvador Barbie. So there's Barbie with the same pose, her right hand in the cross, and her globe is completely see-through, I guess. So again, people continue to draw this kind of pose. Lady with an Ermine, this one was done in about a 3-year period, 1489 to 1491. The woman who was probably posing for the painting was the mistress of a very wealthy duke of Milan, Italy. You see her name. She's looking off to the left, and this is something we see in a lot of the Renaissance era paintings. Her profile is being seen because we see her looking off to her left, and yet the body is facing the other direction. So we see the full body along with, again, a profile of the face. And of course, we're also probably drawn to the animal which she's holding, and why would she be holding that? Aurora, good morning. We're just talking about Leonardo da Vinci. So this animal, it's not an alpaca, this is an ermine, which I do not know anything about ermines, but apparently, if you're looking at what animal family it's a part of, it's a stoat, and it's native to Eurasia. In real life, it would be much larger than what it looks like in this painting, so she's holding it. It's not much bigger than her hand. It's a much larger animal. The reason Leonardo probably drew this image of, he was asked by the Duke to draw a portrait of a woman who was his mistress, and why would he put the animal in there? The ermine symbolizes chastity, and apparently Cecilia, the mistress, was going to be engaged not to the Duke, but to a different wealthy patron of society, a count. You see his name at the bottom. So, she's supposed to be representing chastity before her upcoming marriage. That's what the animal is indicating. If you wanted to see this one, it's in a museum in Poland. All right, the 3 most famous Leonardo images that I showed you at the beginning. Vitruvian Man, as I said, a sketch around the year 1490. Now this goes back thousands of years to ancient Rome and even ancient Greece. And Vitruvius was a Roman architect who lived thousands of years before this. He had done a similar image in one of his sketches. What you're seeing in Leonardo's version is a man in 2 poses, right? He sort of, have one superposed of the other. And this is a very iconic image. It is done as sort of a geometry experiment. We can see a circle, we can see a square, and literally if you study this, you'll and read what Leonardo was writing about it, those are his words around the sketch. Written in Latin or Italian, he would also occasionally write in. And he had this interesting way of writing right to left with a mirror image. He was left-handed, and this was an easier way for him to write on paper and not smudge his sketches. Anyway, he's writing about how the ideal man, and this is what Vitruvius was studying thousands of years earlier, if you extend your arms, that's going to be the same length of your body from your foot to, I believe, the head of your neck. And same thing with your chest, and same thing with your legs. There's images, and his abdomen is exactly in the middle of the circle, and other things are in the middle of the square. So it's really trying to look at the ideal proportions of the human male, which Vitruvius had discussed in an architectural book, or a series of books. This one you can't see because it's a sketch, and if it was exposed to light, it would probably be permanently damaged. So they keep it in an academic library, basically, in Venice. This has been referenced many, many times over in pop culture. The astronauts who were up in the Skylab mission had a similar patch that they wore. That was probably in the 1970s or maybe the 80s, I don't know which year. All right, let's look at the last two real quick. The Last Supper, again, probably the most recognized, reproduced religious painting ever drawn. Took about 3 years. This shows Jesus surrounded by the 12 apostles. In various facial reactions, we're not going to spend time, looking at it. I don't have a great image of it. You would want to see it in person to really, spend time reflecting on it. But the different images of the apostles, including Judas, who sort of was giving them up to the authorities. That's something that scholars would be looking at. This is actually in a church, the Santa Maria del Grazi Church, which is in Milan. So if you enter that church, it's on one end of a corridor, the refectory. And of course it's protected, but it's there on the wall. And that's who hired him to draw this painting for the church. And then finally, the Mona Lisa, which, has anyone in here actually been to Paris and seen it? If you go to Paris, you hopefully be able to go to the Louvre and see it in person. It was completed around 1516. It's very small. It's only, in centimeters, you can see it, but 30 inches by 21. So we're talking 2.5 feet top to bottom and 1.5 feet side to side. This that we're seeing on the projection screen is much larger than it is in real life. Insured for about $1 billion because it was actually stolen over 100 years ago, back in 1911. An Italian nationalist. Now, this is displayed in Paris, in France, right? And it's been displayed in France for centuries, since the late 18th century, since the late 1700s. And this Italian nationalist felt this is a painting done by an Italian artist and it belongs to Italy. And so he did actually steal it. It was recovered later, but it was done because he wanted it to be in Italy. It is probably an independent newspaper in London once said it's the best known, most visited, most written about, most sung about, most parodied work of art in the world. And who is the woman we're seeing here? Some people think it's Lisa Gherardini del Giocondo. She was a wife of a silk merchant who was very wealthy, the mother of 5 children. There's questions, was it really her? I mean, her name is Lisa, so it could have been her. Of course, what people focus on is the half smile. It's the most famous smile probably in art history. And again, it's been duplicated many times. We actually studied some of the parodies of it in World Scholars Cup just a couple of years ago. All right, and then I'm going to wrap this up by just kind of connecting this all to the AcDec. We'll talk about the impact, but then how it connects to AcDec. There are 3 things that we can really look at with Leonardo da Vinci that are referenced in your reference guides in AcDec. One is chiaroscuro, which we see in these 2 paintings here. These are both by Leonardo. Chiaroscuro means how does light and shadow come together? So if you ever see questions in AcDec, that's what it's referencing. Italian, the word for bright in Italian is chiaro, and the word for dark in Italian is oscuro. So it literally is brightness and darkness coming together. And so if you can bring in light with darkness, light with shadow, it heightens the drama, it heightens the volume. And so Leonardo began experimenting with this early. In La Belle Vermeria, you would be looking at sort of the shadow below her chin to see the shadow and how that makes the face stronger. Or if we look at the Madonna image on the right, with baby Jesus again, it would probably be, again, you see some shadow between below the chin of the baby, and you see light coming in through the window there. And so we'll see chiaroscuro in many artists' paintings much prominently, and I'm going to show you just a couple in a second. The other thing that Leonardo really experimented a lot with was linear perspective. This had been used earlier, 1350s all the way up to say 13, or actually I'm missing a zero, but it should be to the 1620s. It's going to allow, again, an illusion in your art painting to help you see depth and space. You know, paintings are just two-dimensional, but what can artists do to make it look more three-dimensional? This is a comment in one of Leonardo's notebooks. Art of perspective is such a nature as to make what is flat appear in relief and what is in relief flat. And so we would see that in some of his paintings, and then certainly in many later artists as well. The other thing Leonardo is really known for is motion, the use of curls. We saw that in some of the earlier paintings we've been looking at, Vitruvian Man, for instance. All right, so let me just wrap up by looking at chiaroscuro, since again, that's a term that I know has come up in AcDec competitions. This originated in the Renaissance period, which, through my dates, right, 1350 to 1620. You'll see it more commonly, more often in the Baroque, which comes a little bit later. I want to show you two other famous paintings that illustrate chiaroscuro. Again, these are ones we've studied in this class before. Judas beheading Holofernes, that was done by Caravaggio in 1602. And then Emily, she mentioned Vermeer earlier. Girl with the Pearl Earring is Vermeer's most famous painting. He, of course, is Dutch. So the first one that I'll show you, Judas beheading Holofernes, when I show it to you, what you're looking at is the beheading of the general by the woman Judah. And you can see lightness contrasting dramatically with darkness. You also see Judah's servant watching sort of in horror as she is killing the general of the neighboring town to protect her town. And this has been done many, many times by other artists, but this is by Caravaggio. And then Girl with the Pearl Earring by Vermeer. Again, chiaroscuro could be seen as we're looking at sort of the earring, which is kind of what we are maybe drawn to, or maybe her pose. It's the same pose that we saw with the woman holding the ermine, done by Leonardo. Linear perspective. Again, Leonardo was sort of experimenting with this. The one who we really associate with linear perspective is Brunelleschi. Filippo Brunelleschi was about a century earlier than Leonardo. He was both an architect and an engineer, and he had constructed a dome in Florence where Leonardo spent a lot of his youth. And so it finished in 1436. Leonardo is going to go watch it and look at it and marvel in it. It's the largest masonry dome in the world. It's still standing, we're almost talking 6 full centuries later. Linear perspective is probably best reflected in Last Supper. So this is the dome in Florence. Again, probably hard to get a perspective of how large this is, but this was there 600 years ago, and a young Leonardo da Vinci is going from his town of Vinci to marvel at this amazing dome. This is all bricks that have been constructed, and to allow those things to still be standing 600 years almost later was a work of marvel. And so that's one thing that Brunelleschi is really perfecting, architecture, but he's also using, so he's going to hold up this device as he's looking at his dome being constructed to make sure that as people see the dome, or later in paintings, the perspective gives it a three-dimensional look to it. And so Leonardo would experiment with this. And then this is really another example of what linear perspective is. You want to make sure the central image has a vanishing point. You have horizontal lines, orthogonal lines, which all draw the viewing audience to the center of the image. And that's what we see in the Last Supper, which I can go back and show you. But, so if we see questions on linear perspective, again, it originates around the time of Leonardo, or even earlier with Brunelleschi. All right, I think that's where we're going to stop off. Thank you guys. Thanks for